The NFL announced some changes last week. Now, this is one that you might not know about, but it could change how we view the Hall of Fame forever. And it might allow one player to get into the Hall of Fame where it is long overdue for his family to hear his name enshrined in canon. Welcome, everybody, to JG9 News, where we talk about all things NFL all the time. I am Jawagir9, representing the 904 from the 602. I know it has been a while since I last put out a video on this channel. I've been very busy streaming and putting out videos on the main channel, but hopefully we can get this thing back up and running and give you the latest updates in the NFL with this unscripted format where I just talk about the latest happenings in the National Football League and give my thoughts on them. There were some changes that were announced last week when it came to the NFL. There were some changes to the rules, but one of the big changes that wasn't really covered a lot was the fact that finally the NFL is recognizing the stats from the All-America Football Conference, the AAFC. Now, the two leagues merged after the 1949 season. It was a partial merger where three of the teams carried over from the AAFC to the NFL: the Cleveland Browns, who are still playing, the San Francisco 49ers, who are still playing, and the Baltimore Colts, who did not last very long. It's not the same team that currently resides in Indianapolis. It's a completely different franchise, but there was a partial merger between the two leagues. Both leagues were highly competitive. They were neck and neck in attendance. In some leagues, or in some cases, I should say, the AAFC actually beat the NFL in terms of average attendance. It was a very competitive league, a very good league, a lot of great players to come out of the AAFC. And we saw the Cleveland Browns, after winning 4 AAFC titles, win the NFL championship immediately after in 1950. So it was a high-quality league. It is long overdue that the NFL recognizes the stats from the AAFC. I don't know why it took so long. I don't know why it took until 2025 for the league to recognize the stats from a league they merged with after the 1949 season. They recognized the stats from the American Football League. That has never been an issue, but they didn't recognize the stats from the AAFC all these years. And it never made sense, seeing as Marion Motley has been in the Hall of Fame since 1968, the very good back with the Cleveland Browns. Now, Motley did next to nothing after the Browns went to the NFL. After the merger, he only had 5 rushing touchdowns, and he had one season where he had over 450 rushing yards. Having said that, he's in the Hall of Fame, and he's been in the Hall of Fame for close to 60 years at this point, and that's because of his contributions with the AAFC. So how does that make sense that you weren't recognizing the AAFC stats, yet you let a guy in the Hall of Fame who pretty much only contributed as a member of the AAFC? Furthermore, Motley was a member of the All-1940s team. Well, that doesn't make any sense. How can he be a member of a team, the All-1940s team, without playing a single down in the NFL, and yet we don't recognize your stats? That seems very counterintuitive. It seems completely contradictory. I don't know what the logic was there. And this is not me saying that Marion Motley should not be in the Hall of Fame, because he is a phenomenal player. The point is that it made no sense why we weren't recognizing these stats before, when we seem to make some exceptions every now and then. Now, what this means for the rules, the leaderboards, I should say, and some stat corrections: Paul Brown gets a few more wins to his name. The very good coach climbs up a little bit. Marion Motley is now one of the top running backs of all time in terms of yards per carry average. There's a few other players that move up pretty significantly as a result of the recognition of these stats from 1946 to 1949. However, I want to talk about one thing, because there was something that a lot of people have asked me, and something that came to mind. How does this change the Hall of Fame? I think there was one guy who would have been very hard to get into the Hall of Fame before this, but now that the stats are being recognized, he has a very clear path to the Hall of Fame, and he should get in. Now, granted, the Hall of Fame has not done a good job in previous years recognizing players from the past. The senior committee, there's not been a lot of guys to get inducted from there. In the senior committee this season, only Sterling Sharp got in. There were some guys from before Sharp's time. There were some guys from previous eras that have been passed over. Art Powell the year before, a great receiver in the American Football League, did not get inducted into the Hall of Fame. So I'm not sure if this is going to happen, but this man has a very good case for the Hall of Fame. I'm not sure anyone's talking about this in regards to the stats between the NFL and the AAFC finally being recognized. But let's talk about Alan Beals, the wide receiver on the San Francisco 49ers, the dominant wideout for San Francisco during the 1940s while the Niners were in the AAFC. Because now I think he's got a very legitimate case, a very real case, and a very good case to get into the Hall of Fame. If you don't know who Alan Beals is, he led the AAFC in receiving touchdowns in 1946, 1947, 1948, and 1949. All 4 seasons that the AAFC was a league, he led the league in receiving touchdowns. He had 10 in 1946, 10 in 1947, 14 in 1948, 12 in 1949. There are only 4 players in the history of professional football to accomplish this feat where they led their league in receiving touchdowns 4 times. All of these guys are first ballot guys. Don Hudson, the very good wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, he was basically on a different playing field. By the time his career ended, he had 99 receiving touchdowns. There were times, especially during World War II, where Don Hudson had more than double the numbers in receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns than the next closest player. He was lapping everyone. He was running circles around everyone. He's a Hall of Famer. Jerry Rice, though I don't think I need to say anything more about Jerry Rice. The best receiver, not even maybe, the best receiver of all time. He is in the Hall of Fame. And then Randy Moss, one of the best receivers of all time. He accomplished that feat 4 times, including that iconic 2007 season where the Patriots went 16-0. He caught a crap ton of Tom Brady's touchdowns, tied Jerry Rice's record for the most receiving touchdowns in a single season. Granted, that was 16 games, Rice did it in 12, but nonetheless, Randy Moss is a Hall of Famer. So Alan Beals is in the same category as Don Hudson, Jerry Rice, and Randy Moss. All 3 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame, yet Alan Beals is not. If we expand that list to players to accomplish that feat at least 3 times, we add 2 more guys to that list. Chris Carter, he's in the Hall of Fame, and Lance Allworth, who is in the Hall of Fame if we're doing it with the San Diego Chargers in the AFL. So there are 6 players in the history of professional football to lead the league in receiving touchdowns 4 times or more. 5 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. Alan Beals is not, but now that his stats are being recognized, he is in that exclusive company and has a really good case. Alan Beals was the first player in the history of professional football to have at least 4 seasons of 10 or more receiving touchdowns. Amazingly enough, Don Hudson, for as good as he was, did not do that. He had 3. Beals was the first guy to do it. He had 46 receiving touchdowns by the time of the merger between the NFL and the AAFC. He was 3rd all-time in pro football history in that category after just 4 seasons. That's how dominant he was. Alan Beals was the 3rd best receiver in NFL history in terms of finding the end zone just 4 years into his career. The only guys ahead of him, Don Hudson and Ken Kavanaugh. That says a lot about Alan Beals and how dominant he was. They were in the top 3 all-time in a league that was around for 30 years when you've barely played. Now, obviously, the criticism with Beals is that he had a very short peak. 1946 to 49 was his peak. Having said that, it was a dominant peak. It was an unprecedented feat. Again, he led the league in receiving touchdowns all 4 seasons. And the Hall of Fame has let guys in before who had really short peaks, but were extremely good. Terrell Davis, for instance, he had 4 seasons of 1,000 or more rushing yards. That's not a lot of seasons. Granted, one of them was 1998, where he had over 2,000 yards rushing and won the Super Bowl. Another one was 1997, where he won the Super Bowl MVP. But that's a pretty short peak. 4 seasons, that's not a lot. But he is in the Hall of Fame, and rightfully so. Tony Baselli, maybe one of the greatest tackles of all time, the very first pick in Jacksonville Jaguars history. He had injuries cut his career prematurely after 2001. He only played 7 seasons in the NFL, yet his peak was so dominant that he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. Gale Sayers, he's been in the Hall of Fame for a very long time. He only had 5 seasons where he played more than 2 games. That's it. 5 years where you play more than 2 games, and yet he's in the Hall of Fame. And I have no problem with Davis, Baselli, and Sayers being in the Hall of Fame. They deserved it. They're some of the best to ever do it at their respective positions. But what I'm saying is that we have let guys in before who had a short peak, but were dominant at their position. And you can't deny the fact that Alan Beals was absolutely dominant. Yes, his peak was only 4 seasons. It was not a long peak, But when you lead the league in receiving touchdowns all 4 seasons, and you're in an exclusive category with Don Hudson, Jerry Rice, and Randy Moss, you've got a pretty good case, especially now that the NFL is finally, after feels like 75 years at this point, correcting what was an error on their end and recognizing your stats. Do I think this is going to happen? Again, based on the way that the Hall of Fame voters have voted on things as of late and based on the rule changes, which limits the number of people in the Hall of Fame potentially, I don't see it happening. Again, the Hall of Fame committee has not done a very good job honoring the past, but this is a really good start. It's a very good start. I think if there's any player to benefit from this recognition of the stats, it is Alan Beals, the San Francisco 49ers wideout, for sure. And hopefully we get to hear his name in canon at some point. Beals is no longer with us. He died back in the 1990s, but hopefully his family can see and hear his name be called, and someday, whether that's 2026, 27, or sometime down the road, the NFL and the Hall of Fame get it right, and they induct the most dominant receiver of the AAFC into the Hall of Fame now that we have recognized the stats from that league in a long overdue move. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you like the idea that the NFL recognizes the stats from the AAFC? Do you think this is a good move? Do you think it's a bad move? Do you think Alan Beals has a shot for the Hall of Fame? Is there any player that you think has a chance to make the Hall of Fame as a result of this that I did not mention? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And that is going to do it for this episode of JG9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, Jaguar9, where we talk about all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is Jaguar9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.